second session. This is our topic here in the Word, through the words of the Gospel of John. And the emphasis last week, as you remember, was very, very much on this topic of that the words of the Gospel are the medium through which the Word comes to us. And there's a uniqueness about the Gospel of John, and that's what was the emphasis last time. How so many of the major themes in the synoptic tradition, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are not present in the Gospel of John. And the most important things in the Gospel of John, like the I am sayings, are not in the other Gospels. So what's going on? And we looked at some of those significant differences. And my conclusion is really Jesus' words in the Upper Room Discourse, chapters 14 through 18, which is a long discourse, this kind of long discourses that we have in the Gospel of John that are not in the other Gospels. And there's not a single parable in the Gospel of John, whereas the other Gospels say Jesus did not teach them without a parable. Well, what's going on here? And so in the Upper Room Discourse, Jesus says to his disciples in so many words, in so many different places, I'm going to leave you, but when I go, I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm going to send the Spirit. And there are many more things that I have to share with you, to tell you, but you cannot hear them now. You cannot grasp them now. You cannot understand them now. But when the Spirit comes, he will continue to teach you and take what is mine and declare it to you. For me, that's the key to the uniqueness of the Gospel of John. That is, I believe that much of what we have in the Gospel of John is the resurrected Lord speaking to the community of his disciples through the Spirit. So we not only have the witness of John and the witness of the other disciples, the historical witness of things that Jesus did and said, but we have a fuller revelation of the significance and meaning of Jesus that comes through the Spirit-empowered community and the writers of the Gospel. So it's the word of both the historic Jesus and the risen Lord who speaks to us in and through the Gospel of John. I think that's basically my conclusion. Okay, now this is Gospel of John, the prologue. The eternal Logos. The word Logos is simply a transliteration of the Greek word for word, thought, idea. The eternal Logos enters time. One of the things, and we're going to look at the prologue, in fact, everything today almost is going to be on the first 18 verses of the Gospel of John. I think that happens in other kinds of literature too. If you read the foreword or an introduction, a prologue, it's a summary, as it were, of everything that follows. It's a condensed expression of what is then unpacked, as it were, throughout the rest of the Gospel. That's the prologue in the Gospel of John. So that's what we're going to focus on today. A few introductory notes, background kind of stuff. I think I mentioned last time that it seems clear from the Gospel, the content of the Gospel itself. Can you guys hear me if I walk away from the phone? I mean, from the, you guys in Zoom. Hello? Yes. Can you hear me if I'm walking around rather than?
Yes.
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 You can?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. We'll just keep it like that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Oh, I don't need this. Where was I?
The background.
Happens to me again. I just turned 85. And the old noggin doesn't work like it used to. You know, there are things that disappeared. You know,
Not much older than I am.
like names, you know, people that I've known all my life, all of a sudden, what is that person's name?
Yes.
Anyway, where was I?
In the beginning.
Yeah, the background, the context of the Gospel of John, probably written, the last gospel to be written, probably in the 90s of the first century, under significant persecution in the Christian church. Domitian was the emperor in the 90s, and he really upped the ante in terms of persecution of Christians. And they needed to hear a comforting, supporting word in that difficult time. And the community that surrounds the Gospel of John, the historical context, the geographical context, is most likely Asia Minor, which is the eastern part of present-day Turkey. That's where Paul was active in missionary work. Galatia, Ephesus, Colossae, and so on, Galatia, as well as John. The earliest Christian tradition has that John, the disciple of Jesus, who in the Gospel of John is called the beloved disciple, he's never named, but early tradition all agrees that it was John, one of the sons of Zebedee, John and James. And where was I going with this? In that geographical area, it's clear from the Gospel of John that the community to whom this witness is given, this book is written, it consists of both Jewish Christians as well as Gentile Christians. And many of the Jewish Christians were already Hellenized, that is, imbued in the Greek world. In the time of Jesus, there were more Jews living outside of Judea, outside of Palestine, than in Palestine. And after the Jewish-Roman War, where Jerusalem was laid flat and the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, all Jews were expelled from the region of Judea, the southern region of Israel, and Jerusalem. And many of them migrated up into other parts of the Mediterranean world, like Asia Minor, okay, Ephesus, Colossae, and so on and so forth. So, a lot of the mission work of Paul, for example, took place beginning in the synagogues in the Hellenistic world. So there were Gentiles who had become Jews or converted to Judaism, and early Christians who were also Jews and celebrated in those synagogues. So this there were clearly a Jewish Christian audience, because I think I said last time that when you read the Gospel of John, there are so many references back to the history of Israel and the Jewish scriptures. And in Asia Minor, they would have been reading the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, which was translated about 200 years before the time of Jesus. Because Hellenistic Jews no longer could read or understand Hebrew. They were speaking Greek, so the Old Testament had to be translated. But there's clearly also a Gentile Christian audience, that is Gentile followers of the way of Jesus. So both of those audiences are addressed. So there's Old Testament Jewish background, the introductory words of the prologue. In the beginning, God. Words right out of what chapter in the Old Testament? Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be," and there was. In the beginning, God spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. And I think I mentioned that last time, Isaiah 55:11, the emphasis on the importance of word, which in Greek is logos, So shall my word be that goes forth out of my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the thing for which I sent it. Word has creative, sustaining power. Words do. And that's the way the gospel begins. The other thing in terms of a Hellenistic background, might as well go to the next slide. The Hellenistic background, in the Greek language, the word logos could mean word, thought, some eternal principle, Greek philosophical thought, Plato and Aristotle and Heraclitus and so on. Speech, the philosopher Heraclitus used the term logos to express rational divine intelligence, not particularly connected to one of the gods in the Greek or Roman pantheon, but something beyond that, some eternal non-human, beyond the human, universal rational divine intelligence, a variety of concepts in Greek philosophy, universal divine reason, logos. So when Greeks read the prologue, when they read in the beginning was the logos, that's the kind of stuff that they thought about. And there was a popular philosophy called Stoicism in the first century. A lot of people, even non-philosophers, had learned concepts out of Stoic philosophy. And very much some of this is there in that general understanding in the culture and society. Universal divine reason, logos, immanent in nature, yet transcending all our positions and imperfections in the cosmos and in humanity. In other words, it's beyond what is human. So the prologue uses that word. In the beginning was the word was with God, the word was God, etc., etc. The prologue is an interesting literary construction. Most scholars believe, on the basis of the structure, and we'll talk about that later, that we may have here the use at the beginning an early Christian poem or hymn. There's poetic form in the prologue. It reflects poetic hymnic devices that were common, especially in biblical literature. In the Old Testament, in the Psalms and the prophets, you have that kind of poetic shape and form, and we'll talk about that a little more later. The Roman governor Pliny the Younger, he was a governor in the Roman province of Bithynia Pontus, that's also Northeast Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, from 109 to 111. And in the letter to the emperor, he asked the emperor how he should handle the Christians, what to do about them. And in a letter to the Emperor Trajan, he wrote of the Christians, they always sing hymns to Christ as to a God. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos word was with God, and the word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Boy, does that sound like this? Pliny may have heard that and seen a copy of it. This is what the Christians were singing. Now, when whoever the writer of the Gospels was, and we don't know exactly who, but it was certainly one person together with other witnesses in the community of John the disciple, who had migrated with Mary, the mother of Jesus. Remember, Jesus on the cross says to Mary, Mary, behold your son, son, behold your mother. And early Christian tradition is pretty clear that John with his mother and other Jewish Christians migrated when they were expelled into this territory of Asia Minor. So they're a community, some scholars talk about a Johannine community that existed in that area in various Christian communities, various churches. They always sing hymns to Christ as to a God. Now, I want you to take this handout, pages 1, 2, and 3. Well, actually, right now, page 1, but you take pages 1, 2, and 3. Those are the ones I want to take a look at. So you have there are poetic parts of what is called the prologue. But then there are phrases and explanations in between the poetic pieces. And when you take those out, you get the poem. What I'm going to show you is the first stanza of this opening hymn or poem in the Gospel of John. The word before creation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And in English translations, it usually says, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But in the Greek text, it's the other way around. And the Word was with God, and God was the Word. The Word was with God in the beginning. You see the poetic parallelism that's going on here. Beginning, Word. Word, beginning. Word was with God, and God was the Word. See the poetic rhythm that's going on here? Poetry in Jewish context, in Hebrew context, was not rhyme or rhythm. It was parallelism, and we'll take a look at another handout in a moment. But this would be the first stanza. The Word before creation, the Logos, who is before and at the beginning of all time, of all that is. And the connection, the relationship between that Word and God, the divine. And God was the Word. In other words, the Word was divine. The Word was with God in the beginning. There's a repetition there and a reinforcement. That's what often happens in Hebrew poetry. That one line is repeated in a different way in the second line, and then repeated again and structured in such a way that they want you really to get it. That's kind of seems to be the emphasis. The second stanza, then the Word in creation. All things came into being through him, that is the Word, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life. And this is not the way it is often translated in our Bibles. What I tried to do is to present it more in keeping with the flow of the Greek language in the early poem, okay? What has come into being in him was life, and the life, here's this progressive, what is sometimes called progressive parallelism. What has come into being in him was life, and this life was the light of all people, and the light shines on in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, see? Life, life, light, light, darkness, darkness. See the progression that's going on here. So reinforcement. So the word in creation. Paul has a parallel to this in Galatians chapter 3, chapter 2 and 3. Paul says, in him, and he's talking about Christ, all things were made through him. So Paul and John have some things in common, and we'll get to some of that. Okay, that's the second stanza, the word in creation, and then third stanza, the word in the world and in Israel's history. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. Let me read Romans chapter 1, which is interesting parallel to this. What can be known about God is plain to them, to humanity, he says, because God has shown it to them ever since the creation of the world. His eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. For they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, and became futile in their imagination and their thinking. That is, the prologue affirms that that knowledge about God was present in creation. For example, the Psalm says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows forth his handiwork. And out of texts like that comes the idea of natural theology. That is, the creation bears witness to the creator. Now, we can interpret that differently, but that is one of the affirmations. So here was the word, the presence of God's creative divine power is present in the world, yet the world did not know him or refused to know him. That's what Paul says in chapter 1. He came to what was his own, yet his own people did not accept him. His own people. This is a reference to the community of Israel, to the people of God. That's the phrases that are used in the Old Testament again and again. And of course, the Old Testament is full of critique through the prophets of their own people on behalf of God. I've been with you. I've taken you out of Egypt. I've protected you. I've taken care of you. When Israel was a child, says the prophet Hosea, when Israel was a child, I loved him and took care of him and led him through the wilderness, etc., etc. Okay. He came to his own people did not accept him, but, and this is a reference to both categories, the world in general, humanity, and Israel, the people of God. He came to what was Israel, but to all who received him, there were always those who, on the basis of their understanding of the revelation of God in nature and in Israel's history, those who received him, who believed in his name, he empowered to become children of God. So that's the third stanza, the word in the world and in Israel's history. Then thirdly, fourth stanza, the word in the incarnation. And we're very familiar with that. Of course, incarnation, you know what that means. The Latin is incarnatus est. He was in the flesh. We say carnal. That means physical body. Okay, carnality. The incarnation. And the word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory. The glory of your Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. From his fullness we all have received grace upon grace. I'm going to talk a little more about that later on today. Let's see, what else do I want to say about this? The word became flesh and lived among us. This is so totally contrary to everything that was affirmed in Greek philosophy. Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy are operated with an understanding of the cosmos as dualistic. There's spirit and there's matter. In fact, Plato has this play on words, soma, sema. Soma means body, physical. Sema means prison or tomb. The image that Plato talked about is that the body is the prison house of the soul, of the true human being. That is why when Socrates is forced to swallow the poison, he does it because it is an act of liberation. Death liberates the soul from the body. Interesting. The other thing that's interesting, the Logos became flesh. It's totally contrary. So that in the second Christian century, they developed a heresy, a teaching that there is no way that the Logos could assume fleshness. It's just contradictory. You can't do it. You know, my mother-in-law was a Southerner. He used to say, "It ain't done it. It ain't done it." That is, if it's not true, if it doesn't work, or whatever. The heresy that developed was called Gnosticism. There was no way that the Logos, that divine reality, could assume the limitation of matter. Matter is evil by definition. For the Christians to say the Logos became flesh like us and dwelt in our midst was just heresy. So the Gnostic heresy, the Gnostic opposition to that became an early Christian heresy, and it was ultimately denounced in the Council of Nicaea and Chalcedon in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries. But in this fleshness, in this embodiment, we have seen his glory. The glory as the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. Let's hold that thought, because we're going to get to it in the handout in a moment. Oops. Okay. That. Where am I going here? I actually want to. No, come on. Come on, Manfred. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. All right. If you would, before we get to the unpacking that prologue a little bit, I want to take out this sheet here that shows how this poetic parallelism works, and how that works in the Gospel of John. As you can see, I have broken this up between what I call first stanza, second stanza, and then there are more longer phrases in between. This is very typical of in Greek theater. We are talking about the Hellenistic word in Asia Minor. In Greek theater, there was always a prologue, an introduction to what was coming. And then the first scene happens, and then there was commentary after the first scene by a narrator, long speeches sometimes, or explanations of what was going on. And then there would be another dramatic scene. And in the Gospel of John, as I mentioned last time, the miraculous deeds of Jesus are never called miracles. John does not use the word dynamis, deed of power, from which we get the word dynamite. John always used the word semeia, sign. And the sign points beyond itself to a deeper kind of meaning, beyond itself. And that's what we have again and again in the Gospel of John. So you have this, in this hymn, the writer of the Gospel introduces then several phrases. But in the poetic sections, I have these brackets around this in the thing, and there were different kinds of parallelism, parallel structures in Hebrew poetry. Synonymous parallelism. In the beginning was the Word. He was in the beginning with God. The Word was in the beginning with God. So it simply says the same thing, but in reverse order. Okay. It's called synonymous parallelism. In the second stanza, the first two lines is what's called antithetical parallelism. Through him all things came into being. And then not one thing came into being but through him. saying exactly the same thing, only in a negative sense. The affirmation and it's a denial, but they say exactly the same thing. And then there's what is called climactic parallelism, where you move forward toward the climax. Verse 4, that which had come to be through him was life, and this life was the light of all people, and this light shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. See the progression that's going on here? And you have it in the other verses also. Yeah. Okay. I want to get to the and the word. Yeah, I want to get to the last one here. The word in the incarnation, and the word became flesh and lived among us. That's this progression again. And we have seen his glory, the glory that is his as the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. The word glory, I may have mentioned that last time. In the Old Testament, there's often repetition about the glory of God was revealed. And a manifestation of the powerful, redemptive, saving, healing presence of God in the life of the people of Israel. It's always understood as the revelation of the glory of God. The Hebrew word for glory is kavod, and the word kavod's literal meaning, basic meaning is heaviness, substantive, impactful. So when the Old Testament talks about that the word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, that does not mean a brilliant sunshine, like we sometimes think of glory, or a glorious piece of music, but it is an event that has heavy, significant importance and impact for the people who experience it. Okay. That's what that phrase means. And the word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. And we'll get back to that phrase, full of grace and truth, a little later. Okay. Now, I want you to go back to page 1 and 2 and 3 of the handout. And I think I'd probably better stay over here so these people don't get messed up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, 7 people on the screen. Hello. Okay. So you also have copies of the handout. I think you were supposed to receive them, those who were going to be with us via the Zoom. Page 2. What I've done there is to try to think about the significance or the meaning of the different parts of the prologue. What I call interpretive comments on the prologue. So the first phrase, in the beginning was the Logos, in the beginning was the Word. And this is not only, I think, a chronological designation, but at the same time, a qualitative designation. That is, at the source of all things, or the source of all things, was the Word. The Greek language has 2 words for time. One word is chronos, from which we get our word chronology. You know, we have past, present, future, etc. Chronology. The second word that also means time is called kairos. And kairos is used in the Greek language and in the New Testament to speak about significant time. Time that is full of meaning, time that a wonderful anniversary celebration, a 50th anniversary. That's Kairos. Yeah, it's called chronological. It's 50 years that we've been married, but it is also Kairos. It has meaning, it has significance because it has a whole history that comes together and is celebrated. So that when Paul says in Galatians, when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son. When the fullness of time had come. The Greek word that's in the text is kairos. Fullness of time, complete time, meaningful time. Okay, and the word was with God. There's a lot of emphasis in the Gospel of John of the Son and the Father. I and the Father are one. And that kind of language is very much present, this togetherness. I think certainly, and the word was with God, indicates relationship, intimacy, relationship. The word was with God. The word manifest in Jesus of Nazareth belongs to eternity, but it comes into time. So it combines the two. Whoever deals in the Gospel of John, and that's unpacked in the rest of the Gospel, whoever deals with the Logos deals with God. Has to do with relationship with God, the Creator. In Jesus of Nazareth, God's word is spoken and embodied. And we have to say a little more about that. God's word is spoken and embodied. It's not only words, it's words that are lived out in a life. There's a famous phrase that's been going around that's attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi is reported to have said once, preach the gospel all the time, and if necessary, use words. Necessary, use words. That is, word and deed have to go together. If our relationships, if the way in which we are present and active in the world contradicts what we affirm and believe, it's empty. It's a lie, as it were. Word and deed belong together. In Jesus of Nazareth, God's word is spoken and embodied. Spoken and embodied. God is a speaking and acting God. And in the Word incarnate, God's will and redemptive character are disclosed. And that next one, in the incarnation, the coming of Jesus, word and deed become one and are forged together in integrity. Word and deed are forged together in integrity. That's our calling as followers of Jesus, for our words and deeds to have integrity. I think this is the model for authentic and believable Christian witness and presence, when our words, confessions, beliefs, expressed values are consistent with our actions. Then the phrase, all things were made through him, through his agency. And I've already talked about this. This is an affirmation against an early Christian heresy, Gnostic, which denied the goodness of the physical realm, which of course is a denial of creation. And part of that heresy was that it was not God, the Father of Jesus, who created the world, but an evil God, because matter was considered to be negative and evil. Whereas in the whole Hebrew and Christian tradition, it is affirmed and glorified and witnessed to and appreciated. And because he is the source of all things, he has a claim on all things. Okay? In him was life, and this life was the light of all. Then that is true. Life is a gift from God. It is not natural. We have physical life, but fullness of life that the gospel talks about goes significantly beyond that. He was in the world, down at the bottom of the page. He was in the world, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, yet his own people did not accept him. But there were people, obviously, within the community of Israel, again and again, who were faithful followers of the word of God, of God's leading. He came to his own, yet his own people did not accept him. That is, there were many. The prophets thundered against the disobedience of Israel in many places. There's a deep sadness expressed in this antithetical couple. He came to his own. He was in the world, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own people, yet his own people did not accept him. Page 3. Move down to the phrase, the third phrase there on page 3. The word became flesh. In the Hebrew context, the use of the idiom of the flesh acknowledges limitation, debasement, humiliation, and creatureliness. That's why there were many in the ancient world that could not accept the idea that the word, the Logos, had become embodied in a physical person. And yet, according to the gospel in Hebrews, there, the full unabridged humanity of the incarnate word, Jesus of Nazareth, is here affirmed. The word became flesh, but it did not give up its wordness, as it were. That's what incarnation is about. He lived among us, literally, and we've heard this before, pitched his tent in our midst. And that, of course, alludes to the whole history of Israel, the tent of meeting, the sanctuary that was carried along in a tent cover. God is present in Israel ultimately in the temple. That was also restrictive and problematic ultimately in Jesus' teaching, and we'll get to that next week in the gospel record. But he pitched his tent in our midst. This is a biblical metaphor for God's presence among God's people. There are a number of references there to Exodus and Joel and Ezekiel. The claim is here made that God is present in flesh, in creatureliness, in suffering, in pain. So the question is, how can such a claim be sustained? That Logos, this absolute divine reality that transcends everything, how can that assume the limitation of human flesh? And the answer is, we have seen his glory, full of grace and truth. Here it is, and in this fourth stanza. The Father's only Son, full of grace and truth, from his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. These 3 paragraphs at the bottom of page 3 are very important, I think. In the Old Testament, I've already talked about that, so we don't need to repeat that, what that word glory means. That glory revealed in Jesus is filled with specific content, full of what? Grace and truth. There is a rich background behind those words throughout the Old Testament. Steadfast love and faithfulness or trustworthiness are used more frequently in the Old Testament to describe the nature of God than those 2 phrases. God is a God of what? Steadfast love and faithfulness. And those words are used together dozens of times throughout the Old Testament. That's the most frequent description of the nature of God. The Hebrew words behind our translation of steadfast love or loving kindness and faithfulness or trustworthiness are used, well, more frequently about God's character and acting. The Hebrew words are chesed and emunah, steadfast love and trustworthiness. Those words are used again and again. When the Old Testament, the Hebrew Old Testament, was translated into the Greek language in about 200 BC, before the time of Christ, for Greek-speaking Jews who no longer could read or understand Hebrew, or even Aramaic, which was the colloquial Hebrew language in Palestine. They read the Greek Bible. And in the Greek Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible is translated into Greek. These Hebrew words, chesed and emunah or emet, for steadfast love and trustworthiness or faithfulness, were translated by several Greek words, which when translated into English mean grace, mercy, compassion, and truth, faithfulness, or trustworthiness. Okay? Thus, the affirmation of our text in Psalm 114 is that in the flesh and blood person of Jesus of Nazareth, the unconditional love and trustworthiness of God have been fully embodied. Fascinating background. 2 words, 2 phrases. God is a God of steadfast love and trustworthiness, translated by Greek words in this prologue, which mean the same thing. In other words, the fullness of God's redemptive presence in the life of Israel and the lives of individuals comes into embodiment, as it were, in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay, let's move on from that to just one more. Come on, where are you? I want that. One more thing. Okay, here we go. As I said at the beginning, the prologue, and we will center down on several other major parts of the Gospel of John next Sunday and the Sunday following. But in the prologue anticipates almost everything that comes in the rest of the Gospel. It announces what is coming. And so both the central message of the Gospel of John that is encapsulated, as it were, in this prologue is first 18 verses. I want to just kind of summarize that, pull it together. In Jesus of Nazareth, I think the Gospel of John affirms that the character and life of God, the redemptive character, the loving kindness and mercy, grace, compassion of God have become visible in his flesh-blood existence and available. Saw last time that in the upper room discourse, not the upper room discourse, in Jesus' farewell with his disciples in chapter 20, Jesus breathes on his disciples and says, what? Receive now the Spirit. Jesus imparts his very life into the life of the disciples, empowered by the Spirit. So the character and life of God, which is steadfast love and trustworthiness, truth and love, mercy and grace, have become both visible in his embodiment and available to Jesus' followers. Take a look at this sequence that I put together here. In the prologue, we beheld his glory, the visibility of God's action. He dwelt among us, God made available. From his fullness we have received, available. 118, no one has ever seen God. He, Christ, has made him known. It's embodied the redemptive trustworthiness and mercy of God. In his what is called the high priestly prayer, chapters 14 through 18, Jesus says, I have manifested in his prayer before God, I have manifested your name. And the name of God is what? I am who I am. And that's where you get the I am sayings in the Gospel of John of Jesus. I have manifested your name, God made visible. I in them through the Spirit, available. In the sending, he breathed on them and said, receive now. It's the present tense, present continuing active tense in the Greek grammar. He breathed on them and said to them, receive now the Holy Spirit, the life of God made available. Or the dialogue with Thomas and Philip in chapter 14. I am the way, said Jesus, the truth and the life. And I've diagrammed it this way. I am the way. What's the content of this? The way is the truth about God and the life of God. God made visible in Jesus and available to us through the empowering work of the Spirit. But the challenge of John is in 17 and 20. As you have, this is in Jesus' prayer to his Father, as you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. In John 20, as the Father has sent me, in the same way, I send you. Just as Jesus was sent to model and to embody, to make visible the truth of God and to share, make available the life of God. So also we are called to model and embody, make visible the truth of God and to share, make available the life of God. That is, again, this concept of word and life, word and action. Not only what we say, but how we live. As the old adage goes, what we do speaks louder than what we say. That's that integrity between the one and the other. So we are called, invited into this way, and it's interesting that the early Christians were called people of the way. People of the way, a new way of being, a new way of living, of being present in the world. The incarnation, that is the historical embodiment of what I try to say in terms of the life-giving, life-restoring, life-supporting, life-creating, life-transforming Word of God in Jesus, finds expression in the life and relationship of those who are his disciples. And that's both individual and communal, as a community of Jesus' disciples. For John, this is the mission of the church, the community of Jesus' followers, empowered by the Spirit. And the promise of John, the entire gospel, and Jesus' teaching in the gospel, is that believing the truth about God and us, receiving the life of God for us and bearing witness to that truth, living that life, leads to transformed human life and relationships, life in its fullness. And that's what Jesus says in the Gospel of John, chapter 10. I came that they, you, us, I came that you might have life and have it in abundance, in fullness. There's a depth to it. It's a new kind of way of being present. And we got 5 minutes, which is very unusual for me, as you know. Any thoughts, any questions, anything that jumps out at you from?
This is kind of a side issue, but it was brought up. I was raised Roman Catholic, and I went to a Catholic school, and we were taught from day one that the world was basically an evil place, that the purpose of our lives was only to be sure and be in a state of grace at the moment of our death, and that pleasures were inherently evil, and that even smiling was an indication of sin. Do you think that's more Gnostic, or is that from Augustine?
No, it's more Gnostic.
Mhm.
The early Christian heresy is, I always wanted to write a book entitled The Platonic Captivity of the Christian Faith. Never got around to it. Got sidetracked into administration, didn't have time to write.
Yet.
Yeah, great. Some of us know that, right? And this dualism, that the physical is somehow bad. What does that say about the whole doctrine of creation? That God calls what? And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Yeah. It's contrary to much in the ancient Near Eastern environment, and certainly in the Greco-Roman world, because of Greek philosophy, which has this dualism. That's also where the immortality of the soul comes in. I suspect that most Christians believe in the immortality of the soul, which is not Christian. The Christian doctrine is resurrection of the dead, because it affirms the physical, new body, transformed body. Yes, this body decays, but fullness of life is in fact what? Embodied life. It's not a ghost flitting around someplace. Angels with or without wings, you know. So I think, there is much in Christian tradition, and not just in Catholicism. I grew up in a very conservative Christian tradition where, you didn't play pool, you didn't dance, etc. All the don'ts, which is very much a reflection of rabbinic legalism. We'll talk about that a little in one of the sessions next week or the following week. The concept of what does the kingship of God look like in human terms. And there's much in the Christian tradition. Some of it comes out of the Latin tradition of the church, Roman Catholicism, but there's some of it also in the Orthodox tradition, the Eastern Orthodox tradition, and of course the Reformers protested against some of that. And I think the whole idea of incarnation is that God in fact affirms the physical in the incarnation. I came up with that too much. Sorry, I have to say this. The saying that went something like this. Why do conservative Christians not have sex standing up? Because somebody might see them and think they're dancing. In other words, there's nothing wrong with sexuality. It's the dancing that's the problem. Is that helpful?
Well, it is. I know I have an old Baltimore catechism in my toolbox, and one of the things it says is that if you're married and you have sex, but you enjoy it too much, that's sinful.
Yeah, and that comes directly from St. Augustine.
Yeah, that's
because he lived quite a loose life before he came to Christ, and so he saw. We have to have sexual relations between male and female in order to produce the next generation. So it's necessary, but you best not enjoy it.
right.
Yeah. Which is, of course, contrary to what human beings experience.
And you certainly wouldn't want to smile doing it.
Certainly don't want to smile.
Yeah.
Now you know where it comes from.
I can smile.
She's also red.
Any other comments or questions or? All right, have a good week and see you next week. And we're going to be talking about what I call the themes of replacement and fulfillment. Jesus present primarily in Judea, near the temple and in the temple area, where he critiques dimensions of Jewish legalisms and Jewish ritual practices that have become rituals and practices without deep meaning. And we'll talk about how Jesus replaces those ideas and ideologies in his teaching, in his presence. And then chapters 5 through 10, where Jesus is at the major festivals of Judaism that celebrate and with gratitude for things that God has accomplished through Israel in its history, redemptive and saving and healing ways. And there was, with every one of the major festivals in Judaism, the Roman garrisons in Judea and especially in Jerusalem were tripled and quadrupled, because there was always the idea in Judaism that at this festival, God was going to break in to a messianic deliverer in power, in force, kick out the damn Romans, and set Israel free again. That was always the expectation. And Jesus appears at these festivals and fulfills the expectations, but not in the way in which they were expected to be fulfilled. That's why Jesus never uses for himself the title Messiah. Messiah in Hebrew, the Davidic deliverer. Jesus says to Pilate at the end of the Gospel of John in the trial, Pilate says to him, "Are you a king?" And Jesus says, "You have said it." And then Jesus goes on to say, "But my kingdom, my kingship, is not of this world's kind. If it were, I could call on thousands of angels to deliver me from what's going on. But the reign of God, the kingship of God, the kingdom of God is a kingdom of justice and care and sharing, etc., etc., etc. It is not power." That's the problem. And I think I talked with this class about that about a year ago on Christian nationalism, which I think is the quest for power over. Jesus rejects empire. Jesus rejects the use of power. And so we'll talk a little about that next week and the following. Have a good week.
Thank you.